Commander Zixathara stood before the massive viewing screen in the Galactic Council's military assessment chamber. Her forearms crossed behind her back as she watched the footage from Earth with growing amusement. The humans called this a military exercise, but to her experienced eyes, it looked more like organized chaos. On the screen, a human soldier named Captain Jake Morrison shouted orders to his squad as they moved through a mock city. The humans ran from building to building, their faces covered in dirt and sweat. They carried primitive kinetic weapons that fired small metal projectiles. Zixathara's people had abandoned such crude technology centuries ago. "Look at them," she said to her aide, clicking her mandibles in what passed for laughter among her species. "They stumble around like hatchlings learning to walk." The aide nodded respectfully. Commander Zixathara was known throughout the Velkarian military as a brilliant strategist. She had won battles across 7 star systems and never lost a single engagement. If she found something amusing, it usually meant complete tactical failure. On the screen, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez coordinated an aerial attack. Her aircraft moved in tight formations, but they were slow and clumsy compared to Velkarian fighters. The weapons they carried could barely scratch the armor of a standard coalition patrol ship, yet the humans seemed proud of their primitive machines. "Their technology is at least 300 years behind ours," Zixathara observed. "These flying machines would be destroyed in seconds against real opposition." She switched to another recording. This one showed human soldiers in what they called Special Forces training. The instructor, Colonel Pete Sullivan, was giving a speech about never leaving a soldier behind. He spoke with passion about honor, duty, and sacrifice for fellow warriors. Zixathara found this particularly ridiculous. In proper military doctrine, individual soldiers were expendable resources. A good commander calculated acceptable losses and moved forward. These humans seemed to think every single life mattered, which was clearly inefficient. "Sir, their emotional attachment to individual units will be their downfall," her aide commented. "No rational species fights that way." "Exactly," Zixathara replied. "They let feelings cloud their judgment. Watch how they react when one of their number falls in training." On the screen, a human soldier pretended to be wounded during the exercise. Immediately, 3 other soldiers broke formation to help him, exposing themselves to simulated enemy fire. In a real battle, this would have resulted in 4 casualties instead of 1. Colonel Sullivan praised this behavior, calling it the warrior's code. He spoke about trust between soldiers and how emotional bonds made units stronger. Zixathara shook her head in disbelief. These humans actually believed their weakness was strength. She made notes on her datapad as she watched more footage. Human combat doctrine relied heavily on individual initiative and adaptation. Soldiers made decisions in the field without consulting higher command. This seemed like a recipe for disaster to someone trained in proper military hierarchy. The humans also showed an alarming tendency to break established rules when they felt it was necessary. In one exercise, Captain Jake Morrison disobeyed direct orders to rescue civilians who were not part of the mission parameters. His superiors praised him for this insubordination. "No discipline," Zixathara muttered. "How can they maintain unit cohesion when soldiers ignore commands?" She studied their weapon maintenance procedures next. Human soldiers spent hours cleaning and caring for their primitive firearms. They gave their weapons names and spoke about them like living beings. Some even carried pictures of family members attached to their equipment. This emotional behavior extended to everything they did. Human pilots like Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez decorated their aircraft with symbols and artwork. Ground troops wrote messages on their ammunition. They turned war into some kind of personal expression. Zixathara had seen enough. She prepared her report for the Galactic Council meeting the next day. Earth had applied to join the Coalition Defense Force, but her assessment would show why this was a terrible idea. The next morning, representatives from 12 species gathered in the council chamber. Zixathara activated the holographic display and began her presentation. "Honored council members," she said, "I have completed my analysis of human military capabilities. My recommendation is immediate rejection of their application." She showed clips of human soldiers stumbling through training exercises. Their physical capabilities are adequate but not exceptional. They lack natural armor, advanced sensory organs, or enhanced strength. Many council species are superior in raw physical terms. The Centauri representative nodded agreement. His people were much larger and stronger than humans. Their technology is primitive, Zixathara continued. These kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion systems are centuries behind our standards. Their best aircraft cannot reach orbital velocity. Their ground vehicles are slow and vulnerable. She clicked to footage of Colonel Sullivan's speech. Most concerning is their tactical doctrine. They prioritize individual survival over mission success. They allow emotions to influence military decisions. They encourage disobedience when soldiers disagree with orders. Several council members made sounds of disapproval. Military discipline was important to most advanced species. "Watch this example," Zixthara said, showing the rescue exercise. When one unit member is wounded, others abandon their positions to help. This emotional response makes them tactically predictable and strategically weak. The Thraxian War Minister spoke up. "Commander, are you saying humans cannot fight effectively?" "I am saying they fight like wild animals," Zixthara replied. "All emotion, no strategy. Their warriors would crumble before any serious threat. They waste resources on individual soldiers instead of focusing on victory." She concluded her presentation with footage of human ceremonies honoring fallen soldiers. The displays of grief and mourning seemed excessive to her logical mind. "These humans form dangerous emotional attachments," she said. "They cannot make rational military decisions when feelings are involved. They would be a liability in any real conflict." The council voted immediately. Earth's application was rejected by a vote of 11 to 1. Only the peaceful Altarian delegate voted in favor, and they were known for their emotional decision-making. As the council dispersed, Zixthara felt satisfied with her work. She had protected the coalition from a species that would have weakened their military effectiveness. The humans could keep playing with their primitive weapons and emotional speeches. Real warriors did not need such things. Her aide approached with the daily intelligence reports. "Commander, there are some unusual readings from the outer rim sectors. Long-range sensors are detecting unknown ship movements." Zixthara barely looked up from organizing her files. "Probably just another trading dispute. The rim worlds are always having problems with smugglers and pirates." She had no way of knowing that those sensor readings would soon change everything she believed about warfare, courage, and the true meaning of military strength. 3 weeks after rejecting Earth's application, Commander Zixthara was reviewing patrol reports when the emergency sirens began wailing throughout Nexus Prime. The deep, bone-rattling sound meant only one thing: the station was under immediate threat. She rushed to the command center where screens showed chaos across the outer rim. Red warning symbols blinked on the star map as colony after colony went silent. The communications officer, a young Velcarian named Kextar, looked up with fear in his compound eyes. "Commander, we're receiving distress calls from 17 systems simultaneously," he reported. "The signals are strange. They cut off mid-transmission." Zixthara studied the tactical display. The pattern made no sense. Attacks were happening too fast and too coordinated for any known hostile force. Pirates worked in small groups. Rebel movements couldn't coordinate across such vast distances. "Show me the sensor data from the rim patrols," she ordered. The main screen displayed readings from the outer surveillance posts. What she saw made her blood run cold. Massive ship formations were emerging from hyperspace at multiple points. The vessels were unlike anything in the Coalition database. Dark, angular designs that seemed to absorb sensor beams rather than reflect them. Admiral Thexval of the Centauri fleet burst into the command center. His normally composed demeanor was shattered. "Zixthara, my battle group just lost contact with the Kepler defense fleet. 30 ships gone in less than 10 minutes. More reports flooded in. The Thraxian orbital platforms around Vega Prime had stopped responding. The mining colonies in the Tau Ceti system were reporting strange ships in their skies before their transmissions ended abruptly." "Who are they?" Kexter whispered. The answer came from the intelligence section. Commander Veldana, the Coalition's best analyst, appeared on the communication screen from her deep space monitoring station. Behind her, other officers worked frantically at their consoles. "We've identified the attackers," she said grimly. "They call themselves the Drakhi, machine hybrid species from beyond the galactic rim. Our computers are analyzing their technology now, and the results are disturbing." She transmitted her data to the command center. Zixthara felt her confidence drain away as she read the report. The Drakhi ships were equipped with adaptive technology that learned from each engagement. Their weapons modified themselves to counter whatever defenses they encountered. Their hulls repaired damage automatically using nanotechnology. "This is impossible," Admiral Thexval said. No species can develop technology this advanced without us knowing about it. They've been watching us for years, Veldana replied. Learning our tactics, studying our weaknesses. They waited until they understood exactly how to beat us before attacking. The next few hours brought nothing but bad news. The pride of the Velkarian fleet, the massive dreadnought Conquest of Stars, engaged a Drakhi formation near the Rigel system. Zixthara watched in horror as her people's most advanced warship was systematically destroyed by enemies who seemed to anticipate every move. The Drakhi used swarm tactics, sending hundreds of smaller vessels against each coalition ship. When the defenders adapted to counter the swarms, the attackers switched to massive single ships. When the coalition adjusted to fight large vessels, the Drakhi returned to swarm formation. They never used the same strategy twice. By the end of the first day, 12 systems had fallen completely silent. Refugee ships began arriving at Nexus Prime, carrying survivors with terrible stories. The Drakhi took no prisoners and showed no mercy. They were harvesting entire worlds, stripping them of resources and population. Zixithara coordinated the defense from the command center, but every strategy failed. Traditional coalition tactics assumed rational enemies who followed predictable patterns. The Drakhi adapted too quickly, learning from each encounter and sharing that knowledge instantly across their entire fleet. On the second day, something unexpected happened. Kextar looked up from his communication console with surprise. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Sol system. It's from Earth." The main screen flickered, then showed a human woman in a dark blue military uniform. She had short gray hair and calm, steady eyes. The identification tag read Admiral Lisa Carter, Earth Defense Command. "This is Admiral Carter to Nexus Prime Command," the human said. "We've been monitoring your emergency broadcasts. We know our application to join the coalition was rejected, but we're offering our assistance anyway." Admiral Thexval snorted dismissively. What could primitive humans do against this threat? Their weapons couldn't even scratch a coalition patrol ship. Admiral Carter seemed to hear his comment through the open channel. "Sir, with respect, we don't fight because our weapons are the biggest. We fight because it's the right thing to do. People are dying out there." Zixthara studied the human's face on the screen. There was something in her expression that seemed different from the emotional speeches she had observed during the military assessment. This was calm determination, not wild passion. "Admiral Carter," Zixthara said, "our analysis indicates these Drakhi have technology far beyond anything in our database. They adapt to counter our tactics within minutes. How do you propose to help?" The human smiled slightly. "Commander, sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. We'd like to send a small task force to assist in the defense of your outer colonies." "Absolutely not," Admiral Thexval interrupted. "We cannot risk coalition civilians in a hopeless gesture. These humans would be slaughtered." Admiral Carter's expression didn't change. "Admiral, my people have been fighting hopeless battles for thousands of years. We've gotten pretty good at it." Behind her, Zixthara could see other humans working at their stations. They moved with the same calm efficiency as their admiral. These were not the emotional, chaotic soldiers she had observed in the training footage. The communication was interrupted by another emergency alert. 3 more systems had gone dark in the past hour. The Drakhi were advancing faster than anticipated, adapting their technology with each victory. "Commander," Kextar said urgently, "the Drakhi are moving toward the inner systems. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the core worlds within 2 weeks." Zixthara felt the weight of command pressing down on her. Every conventional strategy had failed. The coalition's best fleets were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. Pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. She looked back at Admiral Carter's image on the screen. The human was waiting patiently for an answer, showing none of the desperation that Zixithara felt. "Very well," Zixithara said finally. "We accept your offer of assistance. But I must warn you, Admiral, these enemies are unlike anything we've faced before." "Commander," Admiral Carter replied, "you might be surprised what humans can do when people need protecting." The transmission ended, leaving Zixthara staring at the tactical display. Red symbols marked each fallen system like wounds on the star map. Soon she would discover whether her assessment of human military capabilities had been accurate, or if she had made the greatest mistake of her career. 2 days later, Zixthara watched from the bridge of the Coalition command ship as the first human vessels emerged from hyperspace. near the mining colony of Kepler 442b. The Dracai had been attacking the settlement for 6 hours, and coalition forces were barely holding the evacuation zones. The human fleet was smaller than she expected. Only 12 ships, and they looked even more primitive in person than they had in the assessment videos. Boxy, angular designs with obvious armor plating and external weapon mounts. No elegant curves or advanced shielding like proper military vessels. Their ships looked like flying scrap metal, Admiral Thexeval commented from his position at the tactical console. Several other coalition officers nodded in agreement. But Zixithara noticed something strange. While coalition forces maintained careful formations and followed established battle protocols, the human ships immediately broke into smaller groups and scattered across the battlefield. They seemed to be ignoring every rule of space combat. "What are they doing?" Kextar asked, monitoring the communications traffic. "They're not following any coordinated attack pattern." On the tactical display, the human ships moved in seemingly random directions. Some headed directly toward the heaviest Dracai concentrations, while others took wide, curving paths that made no strategic sense. Then the fighting began, and Zixithara saw something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The lead human ship, commanded by Captain Danny Foster according to the identification beacon, charged straight into a formation of 12 Dracai attackers. By every calculation, Zixithara knew this was suicide. One ship against 12 meant certain destruction. But Captain Foster's vessel didn't fight like any ship she had ever observed. Instead of maintaining distance and trading long-range fire, the human ship dove into the middle of the enemy formation. Its weapons fired in all directions at once, not aiming for clean kills but for maximum disruption. The Dracai, programmed to adapt to conventional tactics, seemed confused by this approach. Their formation scattered as they tried to track a target that refused to behave predictably. "Insane," Admiral Thexeval muttered. "He'll be destroyed in seconds." But Captain Foster's ship survived, and now 2 more human vessels joined the chaos. They fired not just at Dracai ships but at the space around them, creating a cloud of explosive debris that interfered with enemy sensors. On the ground, something even more incredible was happening. Sergeant Nick Johnson led a squad of human soldiers who had landed during the evacuation. The coalition ground commander had ordered all troops to fall back to defensive positions, but the humans were advancing toward the heaviest fighting. Zixithara watched through drone cameras as Sergeant Johnson's unit moved through the colony streets. They didn't march in formation like proper soldiers. Instead, they flowed like water around obstacles, each individual making independent decisions while somehow staying coordinated as a group. When they encountered a Dracai patrol, the humans did something that defied all military logic. Instead of taking cover and calling for support, they attacked immediately. Private Katie Brooks threw herself at a mechanical warrior twice her size, using her small kinetic weapon to target joints and sensor clusters. "She's going to be killed," Kextar said, watching the display. But Private Brooks wasn't fighting alone. The moment she engaged, every other human in the squad instantly shifted to support her. They didn't wait for orders or follow predetermined tactics. They simply reacted as if they shared a single mind. When Private Brooks was wounded by Dracai return fire, Zixithara expected the unit to retreat. Coalition doctrine called for tactical withdrawal when casualties mounted. Instead, the humans became more dangerous. Sergeant Johnson's face changed when he saw his wounded soldier. The calm professionalism was replaced by something primal and terrible. He coordinated an assault that was part strategy, part fury, and completely effective. The humans used weapons in ways their designers never intended. They threw explosive charges like rocks, turned maintenance tools into weapons, and modified their equipment in real time to counter Dracai technology. Most shocking of all, they refused to abandon Private Brooks. 2 soldiers carried her while the others provided covering fire, maintaining their advance even while protecting their wounded. In space, the human fleet was achieving similar impossible results. Lieutenant Carla Smith piloted a fighter that should have been destroyed 10 times over, but she kept finding ways to survive. Her aircraft was covered in battle damage, held together by emergency patches and sheer determination. "How is she still flying?" Admiral Thexeval demanded. "That ship's hull is breached in 17 places." Zixithara studied the tactical readouts. Lieutenant Smith's fighter was indeed barely functional, but she was using its damaged condition as a weapon. Venting atmosphere created unpredictable thrust patterns that confused Drakhi targeting systems. Sparking electrical systems interfered with enemy sensors. The human pilot wasn't just adapting to damage, she was using it strategically. On the ground, Sergeant Johnson's squad had linked up with other human units. Now 40 soldiers were advancing through the colony, driving back Drakhi forces that had been dominating coalition troops for hours. But it wasn't their numbers that made the difference. It was how they fought. When one unit encountered a heavily armored Drakhi walker, they didn't call for heavy weapons or air support. Instead, they swarmed it like angry insects, each soldier attacking a different component until the machine collapsed from cumulative damage. When Drakhi adaptive shields began countering their kinetic weapons, the humans switched to improvised explosives made from mining equipment. When the enemies adapted to explosives, they used mining tools as close combat weapons. The Drakhi technology that had dominated every coalition engagement seemed powerless against opponents who refused to use the same tactic twice. "They're not following any doctrine at all," Zixthara said. "Watching human soldiers work together without apparent coordination, how do they maintain unit cohesion?" She got her answer when she observed their communications traffic. The humans weren't just sharing tactical information, they were sharing emotions. When one soldier felt fear, the others responded with encouragement. When someone showed determination, it spread through the entire unit like an infection. Private Katie Brooks, despite her wounds, was still fighting. Her presence seemed to inspire the other soldiers to impossible acts of courage. They weren't just following orders, they were protecting something they cared about. By the end of the day, the impossible had happened. The Drakhi forces that had been systematically destroying coalition units for weeks were in full retreat from Kepler 442b. The human ships, battered and barely functional, limped back to the colony to evacuate the remaining civilians. Zixthara stared at the tactical display in silence. Every rule of warfare she understood had been broken, yet the humans had achieved complete victory against superior opponents. "Commander," Kextar said quietly, "how did they do it?" She had no answer. The humans had fought with weapons she considered obsolete, using tactics that violated every principle of military science, led by soldiers who seemed to care more about each other than about winning, and somehow impossibly it had worked. Over the following weeks, Zixthara found herself studying human military operations with growing fascination and confusion. The victory at Kepler 442b had not been a lucky accident. Wherever human forces engaged the Drakhi, impossible things kept happening. She watched Major Rick Davis lead a rescue mission to Proxima Station, where 3,000 coalition civilians were trapped behind enemy lines. Every tactical analysis said the mission would fail. The station was surrounded by Drakhi forces, heavily defended and deep in enemy territory. Major Davis arrived with only 200 human soldiers and a plan that made no sense to anyone else. Instead of trying to fight through the Drakhi defenses, he divided his forces into 20 small teams and had them infiltrate the station from multiple directions simultaneously. "This is madness," Admiral Thexaval said, monitoring the operation from Nexus Prime. He scattered his forces. "The Drakhi will destroy them piece by piece," but that wasn't what happened. Each small human team caused chaos far beyond their numbers. They sabotaged power systems, disrupted communications, and created distractions that drew Drakhi forces away from the civilians. What amazed Zixthara was how the humans coordinated without central command. When one team encountered heavy resistance, nearby units automatically shifted to help them. When another team found an opportunity, others instantly moved to exploit it. The rescue succeeded not because of superior firepower or advanced tactics, but because the humans refused to leave anyone behind. They fought for 3 days straight, taking terrible casualties, but they evacuated every single civilian. "Why do they do this?" Kexter asked as they watched wounded human soldiers helping coalition refugees board transport ships. "These people aren't even their species." Zixthara had been wondering the same thing. She decided to study human military history to understand what made them fight this way. What she discovered shocked her more than anything she had witnessed in battle. Humans had been at war for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts like most species, but constant, continuous warfare spanning thousands of years. They had fought each other over territory, resources, ideas, and beliefs. They had developed military science through necessity, not academic study. She read about human conflicts with names like World War II, where entire nations committed everything they had to total warfare. She learned about battles where human soldiers held impossible positions against overwhelming odds, not because they were ordered to, but because they refused to let their friends down. The emotional bonds that she had considered weakness were actually the product of thousands of years of combat evolution. Humans who cared about their fellow soldiers fought harder and survived longer. Those who abandoned their wounded were abandoned in return. She watched Commander Beth Taylor demonstrate this principle during the battle for the Centauri mining platforms. When her flagship was crippled by Dracai weapons, standard doctrine called for her to transfer to another vessel and continue the battle. Commander Taylor refused. Her ship carried 300 wounded crew members who couldn't be moved. Instead of abandoning them, she restructured her entire battle group around protecting the damaged vessel while continuing to fight. She's sacrificing tactical advantage to protect soldiers who are already out of the battle. Admiral Thexaval observed, "This makes no strategic sense." But Zixathera was beginning to understand that human strategy operated on principles her species had never considered. When Commander Taylor chose to protect her wounded crew, every other human in the battle group fought harder. They knew their commander would never abandon them, so they were willing to take greater risks. The Dracai adaptive technology that had dominated coalition forces seemed useless against this kind of warfare. Their computers could analyze tactics and weapons, but they couldn't predict what humans would do when emotions were involved. She observed this during the defense of the agricultural world New Eden. Colonel Gary Mitchell commanded the human ground forces when Dracai invasion forces landed. The colony had minimal defenses and was supposed to fall within hours. But the humans had spent 2 days talking to the farmers and their families. They had learned names, heard stories, and seen pictures of children. When the attack came, they weren't just defending a strategic position, they were protecting people they had come to care about. The ferocity of their defense was something Zixathera had never witnessed before. Human soldiers fought with a desperate creativity that confused every Dracai tactical algorithm. They used farming equipment as weapons, turned irrigation systems into traps, and modified civilian vehicles into mobile weapons platforms. When Private Marcus Webb was surrounded by 3 Dracai warriors, he didn't surrender or retreat. Instead, he detonated his own ammunition pack, taking all 3 enemies with him. His final words over the radio were, "Tell Jenny I kept my promise." That single act of sacrifice inspired the entire human force to impossible acts of courage. They held positions that should have been overrun, made weapons from materials that shouldn't work as weapons, and coordinated attacks that had no basis in any military manual. Most importantly, they adapted faster than the Dracai technology could keep up with. Every time the enemy machines learned to counter a human tactic, the humans had already moved on to something completely different. Captain Rosa Gonzalez exemplified this adaptability during the space battle above New Eden. When Dracai ships began countering her squadron's attack patterns, she didn't try to modify those patterns. She abandoned them entirely and had her pilots begin flying in ways that violated basic physics. Her fighters used their own damaged systems as weapons, flew through debris fields that should have destroyed them, and coordinated attacks by listening to music rather than tactical commands. The Dracai computers had no framework for understanding this kind of behavior, but Zixathera was beginning to understand. The humans weren't just fighting with weapons and ships, they were fighting with their entire culture. Every story they told about heroism, every song about never giving up, every tradition about protecting the innocent was part of their military doctrine. She watched human medics like Dr. Sarah Kim risk their lives to save wounded coalition soldiers they had never met before. She observed human engineers like Lieutenant Tom Johnson work for days without sleep to repair damaged alien technology they barely understood. These weren't military tactics. They were expressions of human nature, and that nature had been shaped by millennia of warfare into something the galaxy had never seen before. The final revelation came when she analyzed the psychological profiles of human military leaders. Unlike coalition officers who were selected for intelligence and tactical knowledge, human commanders were chosen for their ability to inspire others to fight beyond their normal limits. General Kevin Clark, who was coordinating human forces across multiple star systems, had no formal military education. He had risen through the ranks because soldiers trusted him to make decisions that protected their lives while accomplishing impossible missions. They don't fight like a military force. Zix Thara realized as she watched General Clark coordinate the defense of 3 systems simultaneously. They fight like a family protecting their home. And that, she was beginning to understand, made them the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever produced. The final test came when the Drakhi launched their ultimate assault on Nexus Prime itself. Intelligence reports showed their massive command ship, a dreadnought the size of a small moon, approaching the station with the largest fleet anyone had ever seen. Zix Thara stood in the command center watching the tactical display with growing despair. The Drakhi had learned from every previous battle, incorporating countermeasures for every successful human tactic. Their final fleet seemed unstoppable. Commander Kextar reported, "The enemy dreadnought has already destroyed the Rigel defense fleet, the Centauri border patrol, and Admiral Thexval's battle group. Nothing has even scratched its hull. The massive ship was a masterpiece of adaptive technology. Its armor modified itself to resist whatever weapons struck it. Its shields learned to deflect new types of energy. Its weapons automatically adjusted to counter any defensive measure. 3 coalition fleets had already been annihilated trying to stop it. Now only the station's defenses and a small human task force led by General Kevin Clark stood between the Drakhi and the Galactic Council. "Sir," the communication officer announced, "General Clark is requesting permission to engage the dreadnought." Admiral Thexval, participating via emergency communication link from his damaged flagship, laughed bitterly. "With what? The humans have maybe 30 ships left. That dreadnought has escort fleets larger than our entire remaining force." But Zix Thara had learned to listen when humans made impossible plans. "General Clark, what do you propose?" The human appeared on the main screen. His uniform was torn and stained with smoke, but his eyes held the same calm determination she had seen in every human commander. "Commander Zix Thara, we're going to board that dreadnought and destroy it from the inside." The silence in the command center was complete. Even suggesting such a plan bordered on insanity. The dreadnought was surrounded by thousands of escort ships protected by adaptive shields and filled with automated defenses. "General," Zix Thara said carefully, "our analysis indicates that ship carries enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. How do you plan to get close enough to board it?" General Clark smiled grimly. "Ma'am, we're going to ram it." Before anyone could object, he continued, "Not all of us. Just enough ships to create breaches in the hull. Volunteers only." Zix Thara watched as human officers began volunteering immediately. Captain Helen Wright stepped forward first, followed by Commander Paul Jackson and a dozen others. They weren't being ordered to sacrifice themselves. They were choosing to do it. "This is suicide," Admiral Thexval protested. "You'll all be killed for nothing." "Admiral," General Clark replied, "maybe you're right. But if we don't try, everyone dies anyway. At least this way, we go down fighting." The human plan was audacious beyond reason. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Morgan would lead assault teams through the breaches created by the ramming ships. They would fight their way to the dreadnought's control center, while Captain Julie Anderson led a second team to the power core. Every part of the plan required perfect timing, incredible luck, and the kind of sacrifice that made Zix Thara's logical mind rebel. Yet as she watched the humans prepare for their final battle, she realized they weren't just hoping for luck. They were creating their own. The battle began with Captain Helen Wright leading 5 ships in a direct assault on the dreadnought's forward section. Their weapons had no effect on the adaptive armor, but they weren't trying to destroy it with firepower. They were using their ships as guided missiles. "All ships, this is Helen Wright," came the transmission. "It's been an honor serving with you. Tell our families we did our job." Zix Thara watched in stunned silence as Captain Wright's ship slammed into the dreadnought's hull at maximum velocity. The explosion was visible from thousands of kilometers away, and when the flames cleared, there was a gaping hole in the supposedly impenetrable armor. Commander Paul Jackson followed seconds later, his ship diving into the breach and exploding deep within the enemy vessel. More holes appeared as human volunteers drove their ships like spears into the heart of the Drakhi dreadnought. Through the chaos, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Morgan led his assault teams aboard small fighters that darted through the escort fleet like angry insects. The Drakhi ships tried to stop them, but human pilots flew with a reckless skill that defied every safety protocol ever written. "How are they getting through?" Kextar asked, watching human fighters weave between enemy vessels that should have destroyed them instantly. Zixathara was beginning to understand. The humans weren't just flying their ships, they were becoming part of them. They pushed their machines beyond safe limits, used battle damage as tactical advantages, and coordinated through instinct rather than communication. Inside the dreadnought, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan's teams encountered the full fury of Drakhi automated defenses. The corridors filled with mechanical warriors, energy barriers, and adaptive traps designed to stop any invasion. But the humans had brought something the Drakhi hadn't planned for pure human stubbornness. When Sergeant Andy Miller's squad was pinned down by defensive turrets, they didn't retreat. They modified their explosive charges to create shaped charges that could penetrate the adaptive armor. When the charges ran out, they used their own weapons as improvised bombs. Captain Julie Anderson's team reached the power core through a route that required them to crawl through ventilation systems, fight through zero gravity, and bypass security systems that adapted to their presence. They succeeded because they refused to accept that it was impossible. Julie Anderson to all teams, came her voice over the radio. "I'm at the core, beginning the shutdown sequence." But the Drakhi had one final surprise. Their dreadnought was more than just a ship. It was a living machine that could regenerate damage and adapt to any attack. As Captain Anderson began sabotaging the power systems, the ship itself began to fight back. "The corridors are changing," Lieutenant Colonel Morgan reported. "The ship is trying to trap us inside." That was when Zixathara witnessed the most incredible display of human courage she had ever seen. Instead of retreating when the ship began to collapse around them, the human assault teams pressed forward. They knew they would never escape, but they were determined to complete their mission. "All teams, this is Steve Morgan," came the final transmission. "Whatever happens, we finish this. For everyone who can't fight, for everyone who's counting on us, for everyone who ever believed that the good guys can win." The explosions began deep within the dreadnought as Captain Anderson's team destroyed the power core. The ship's adaptive systems tried to compensate, but human saboteurs had damaged too many critical systems simultaneously. From the command center, Zixathara watched the mighty Drakhi dreadnought tear itself apart from the inside. The ship that had been unstoppable was dying because humans had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect people they had never met. "Commander," Kextar said quietly, "they did it. The dreadnought is breaking up." As the massive ship exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire star system, Zixathara finally understood what she had been witnessing for weeks. The humans didn't fight with superior technology or advanced tactics. They fought with something far more powerful, the unbreakable conviction that some things were worth dying for. The Drakhi fleet, leaderless and confused by the loss of their command ship, began to retreat into hyperspace. The invasion was over, stopped by a species that everyone had considered too primitive to matter. Later, as rescue ships searched for survivors from the dreadnought assault, Zixathara composed her final report on human military capabilities. This time, her assessment was very different. "The human species possesses military capabilities that exceed any known force in the galaxy," she wrote. "Their strength lies not in their technology or tactics, but in their willingness to sacrifice everything for principles larger than themselves. They fight not just with weapons, but with love, honor, and an unshakable belief in protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She paused, looking out at the stars where brave humans had given their lives to save worlds they had never seen. "I initially mocked humanity's fighters, calling them emotional and primitive. I was wrong. Their emotions are not weakness, but the source of strength beyond measurement. They have shown us what it truly means to be warriors, and we are all safer because they exist." The galaxy had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from logic or technology, but from the simple human refusal to let evil win.